Good afternoon, everyone. We still have a few more people joining, but because our topic has a lot of information today, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you to BioPharm's 5th webinar in our series of CTMS webinars. So far, we have presented the benefits of Siebel Clinical integration, Siebel Clinical for small and medium-sized organizations, Clinical Trial Management Systems 101, and increase ROI through an effective CTMS training program. In case you missed any of our previous webinars or you'd like to watch them again, the recorded presentations are available for download from our website at www.biopharm.com. Today we're going to take a look at some Siebel Clinical best practices that can help maximize the system's functionality, support and maintain consistent business processes, and also assist in the preservation of a clean database. As we all know, clinical trials continue to grow larger and more complex. This in turn is increasing pressure on companies to manage them in more efficient and effective ways. Using best practices with your Siebel Clinical application will help accomplish these operational goals. I'd like to begin by introducing myself. Sorry about that. My name is Alice Crawford, and I am a functional lead for the Clinical Trial Management Solutions practice at BioPharm Systems. I've been working in the clinical trials industry for over 15 years and have been with BioPharm for the past 6 years. For over a decade, my focus has been on the analysis, use, and design of clinical trial management systems. I participate in all phases of CTMS implementations, and I especially enjoy working with clients during the requirements gathering and design phases of a project. Let's take just a couple of minutes to review today's agenda. We're going to start by defining what a best practice is, and then move on to the topics of SOPs and work practices. From there, we're going to delve into best practices for administrative functions in Siebel Clinical, such as the setup and maintenance of responsibilities, positions, list of values, and more. Next, we'll move on into the user interface and discuss best practices surrounding data entry, contacts and accounts, and various templates. After that, we'll touch on protocols, sites, reports, and queries. And finally, we will provide just a few miscellaneous tips and tricks that we find useful when working in Siebel Clinical. If time allows, we'll wrap up our presentation with a question and answer session. Now, before we get started, I just want to point out a few features of the webinar platform we are using. During the presentation, all of the participants will be in a listen-only mode. However, you can always submit questions at any time during the presentation by typing them through the chat function located at the left of your screen. Those questions are going to come directly to me, and I will answer them as time allows during our Q&A session. If we don't have time to answer all of the submitted questions during the webinar, we will reply to each one individually after the webinar. So we have a lot of content that we hope to cover today, and we may end up going over the allotted hour by just a bit. However, keep in mind the webinar is being recorded, so if you're unable to stay on for the entire presentation, you can view the webinar at your convenience since it will be posted on our website within the next 24 hours. We will also be sending a link to all of the participants so that they can access the webinar directly. So let's get started. What is a best practice? On the screen, I've listed 3 definitions of a best practice. As you can see, even though stated a bit differently, all of the definitions indicate that a best practice is a proven method of performing a task or function that results in a consistent, effective, and superior result. Obviously, those attributes are all things that we want to achieve on a daily basis when managing our clinical trials with Siebel Clinical. The end result of the consistent use of best practices is an increase in the efficiency and quality of trial management, as well as savings in time and money. So now let's focus on some specific best practices that can be followed when using Siebel Clinical. Standard operating procedures, always a favorite topic of everyone's. Ideally, an analysis and review of your organization's current business processes and any existing gaps were performed during the requirements gathering and design stage of your CTMS project. This type of analysis should always be performed early on in a project of this nature. In that way, during the implementation, you have a chance to update your SOPs and work practices in relation to the application that is being implemented, in this case, Siebel Clinical. The existence of up-to-date SOPs will enable standard trial management across the organization and will also result in consistent and efficient clinical practices across the board. A couple of SOPs of special value for Siebel Clinical are the Siebel Clinical Administration and Maintenance SOP and the Siebel Clinical Access and Use SOP. The Siebel Clinical Administration and Maintenance SOP describes the roles and responsibilities of clinical administrators, Siebel administrators, database administrators, and even network administrators in relation to the setup, administration, and maintenance of your Siebel Clinical system. The Siebel Clinical Access and Use SOP outlines the roles and responsibilities of system users, user managers, and IT in regards to system access requests, access approvals, and finally configurations. As a rule, SOPs should be finalized prior to go live and should be included as part of your user training. Let's move on to work instructions. Once your SOPs are in place and any Siebel Clinical customizations or design changes have been finalized, it's time to create work instructions for your users. The work instructions should be finalized prior to go live and also should be included as part of your user training. They serve as step-by-step guides on how to perform standard functions in Siebel Clinical and will ensure that everyone is doing things in the same manner. In addition to the work instructions, we recommend quick reference guides to act as a great go-to adjunct. Users typically find them easier to refer to than large user guides, online help, etc. Work instructions and quick reference tools help users have the confidence in their ability to use the system correctly. They also tend to increase user acceptance since they decrease frustration for the novice user and are seen as both user-friendly and a time-saving resource. Responsibilities in Siebel Clinical control the access to screens and views that are visible to each logged-in user. During the design and development phase of an implementation, a review and/or creation of a clinical organizational chart should be performed to determine the roles and responsibilities that each user needs to have in order to perform their assigned task in Siebel Clinical. From that review, you are able to create a user access matrix to apply in Siebel Clinical. As part of this process, it's important to keep the total number of responsibilities to a minimum in order to lessen the complexity of the assignment and maintenance of system users. For example, when analyzing roles and responsibilities, if two different types of team members will perform similar but not exactly the same functions in Siebel Clinical, determine whether or not these user types could be assigned to the same application responsibility instead of having to create two slightly different responsibilities. Also remember that even though it's tempting to allow the majority of users access to most, if not all, of the clinical information maintained in Siebel Clinical, everyone who is involved in a project or protocol should not necessarily have access to all of the information about that project or protocol. It is important to balance the availability of up-to-date data with the need to keep tight control over data access. Only those users with a legitimate need to access data should be provided authorization to specific views and records. While the responsibilities in Siebel Clinical control access to screens and views, positions control access to the actual data. A position is a unique identifier that is assigned to each Siebel Clinical user. In other words, records are assigned to or associated with positions instead of being assigned to individual users. The creation of positions in Siebel Clinical is a critical administrative function, but tends to often result in confusion and sometimes unexpected errors. Even though this is an administrative function, it is important for system users to have a basic understanding of the general theory behind the use of positions. To simplify the maintenance of user positions associated with employee turnover or internal reorganization, we highly recommend that the naming convention and assignment for positions correspond to your clinical organizational chart that we discussed earlier. We strongly discourage using individuals' names for the assignment of positions. For example, user positions should be named something like study manager, internal CRA, finance manager, etc., instead of Joe Smith, Sally Johnson, Jane Jones. Since multiple individuals often have the same job function, you can simply append a 1, 2, or 3, etc. to the position name to differentiate those positions. For instance, Study Manager 1, Study Manager 2, Study Manager 3, etc. To emphasize this point, let's say that Jane Jones is an internal CRA and she has decided to leave the company. If data records have been assigned to Jane Jones instead of to CRA2, then an administrator would have to perform a significant amount of maintenance to reassign all the applicable records to the new CRA2 employee. Whereas if data records are assigned to CRA2 to begin with, a new position does not have to be created for the replacement. Instead, the new employee just has to be assigned the CRA2 position to have immediate access to their appropriate records. We mentioned that each position should only be assigned to one user. Likewise, a user should only be assigned one position, if at all possible, since a user can only log in to the application utilizing one position at a time. The ability to assign multiple positions to a single user is designed for the situation where a user is temporarily performing the job functions of 2 or more people. Once the second job function is filled by a new hire or by an absent employee who returns from leave, the temporarily assigned second position can easily be transferred to the new or returning employee by removing the position from the one employee and assigning it to the other. Just keep in mind that if a user is assigned more than one position, the active default position must be indicated in user preferences for that individual. For that user to do something related to the non-default position, they have to manually switch that default position in their user preferences and sign into the application again. Along with the discussion of responsibilities and positions, I just want to remind you that user accounts should never be deleted. They should only be disabled. And to disable a user account, all you have to do is to remove all responsibilities associated to the user and then disassociate them from their old position and reassociate them to a generic inactive position. List of values. The list of available values for drop-down fields in Siebel Clinical should be strictly controlled. The application comes with a standard out-of-the-box values for many fields, but these are often modified to meet each organization's internal nomenclature and use. It is important that someone is charged with maintaining the LOVs and that specific guidelines and controls are set in place for the modification and update of LOV options. We recommend the use of an LOV request form to manage requests from system users for the creation, modification, or inactivation of an LOV option in Siebel Clinical. In addition, an up-to-date spreadsheet should be maintained that lists all drop-down fields in the application along with their associated value options. All modifications should be reviewed and approved by a representative sample of business users, and only a couple of administrative users should have the access necessary for modifying these values. Finally, a history of all modifications and changes should be maintained for future reference. It is important to know that the modification of some LOVs can adversely impact standard Siebel Clinical functionality. You do not want to modify list of values that are used internally by the Siebel application. This includes records such as list of values type is source type, and records where the list of values type includes the word repository. Also, do not change the Language Independent Code, or LIC, from the Siebel standard even if you change the display value. There are internal code dependencies based on the LICs that you don't want to mess with. Avoid LOV modifications that could result in values being displayed improperly, or even not at all. One of these examples is changing all list of values to uppercase lettering. Also, do not assume that modifying a display value will automatically update all records that have been populated with the old value. For example, changing the account type option of Central Lab to Reference Lab will result in the option of Reference Lab being available in the account type drop-down going forward, but all account records that were previously entered with an account type of Central Lab will still display Central Lab in the account type field. A couple of LOV maintenance tips to be aware of. LOVs are managed, created or modified by an administrator in the Administration Data List of Values section of the application. Never delete an LOV. Instead, deactivate the LOV by unchecking the active flag. Conversely, if you want the value option to display in an associated drop-down, make sure that the active flag is checked. And finally, after making any type of LOV change in administration data, be sure to click the Clear Cache button in order for the changes to take effect. Let's move on into the application. We're going to start with the home screen. The home screen is the first screen that is displayed when a user logs onto the system. It is a convenient way to track and access records that are relevant to the logged-in user. The best practice is for each user to organize their home screen in the manner that is most beneficial for their use. The Edit Layout function allows the user to show hidden lists or forms, collapse or expand all the available lists or forms, and even restore the default layout. Modifications are user-specific, so the user can rearrange the sections in such a way that the ones used most often are in the top area of their home page, and any sections they never use are hidden. The changes you make for your home screen remain in effect each time you log in or until you decide to change the layout again. And also remember that it is always possible to just reset your home screen to the default layout. Another best practice is for users to take advantage of the hyperlinks on the home screen to quickly navigate to specific areas of the application, such as a specific protocol or site. List applets. A list applet in Siebel Clinical is simply a list of screen-specific records. The layout is very similar to an Excel worksheet list. A few nice attributes of list applets are that users can rearrange the way the data is displayed by rearranging columns simply by dragging and dropping them to the desired location, adding or removing displayed columns via the Columns Displayed menu option, sorting columns of information using the sort icon in a column header, and querying for a specific list of results. The best practice for list applets is for each user to modify the layout of list applets so that the information that they need is visible with a minimum amount of scrolling. These practices are also useful when exporting data or quick printing screens and views. Data entry. One of the biggest challenges companies face when implementing a new CTMS is ensuring that the initial data entry and subsequent maintenance is of good, clean, up-to-date, and consistent quality. The best way to ensure this is to have a single document that provides explicit instructions for standard data entry and maintenance. A standards document ensures that all users know how and in what format data should be entered in the system. The document should include information such as what to enter in each line of an address record, the accepted or the not accepted use of abbreviations, the accepted use and values for comments fields, the format of a site number, and other company-defined standards. Standard nomenclature and definitions for important fields, such as status fields, should also be included to make sure everyone has the same understanding of sometimes similar terms. You should also outline the steps to take to avoid duplicate records. All users should be trained on the standards document, know that it is mandatory that they follow the standards, and be informed of any revisions to the document. An abbreviated audit trail for a record in a list or format can be displayed by highlighting the record and then clicking and selecting the About Record option in either the Help drop-down or within the Menu button drop-down. The About Record properties display certain key information: who created the record and when, who edited the record most recently and when, how many total times the record has been modified, and the row number associated with the record. The row number is a unique ID for each record in the application and is not duplicated anywhere else. Knowing the row ID will allow you to return to a specific record with complete certainty and is also useful when troubleshooting a record-related application issue. Contacts, accounts, and addresses. They're key record entities that are used throughout the application. Because the entry and maintenance of these records is so critical, it is best for these record types to be either centrally or regionally administered by a few detail-oriented individuals. It is also important to create guidelines and controls for the creation, modification, and activation of these records. A couple of tools that we recommend to support this process are, of course, the data standards document we just spoke of, and additionally, a contact request form and an account request form. In addition to record entry, the maintenance of contacts and accounts should follow specific standards and guidelines. This is especially true regarding the deletion of records. One of the most important best practices is to avoid the hard deletion of any record, but especially contact and account records, since they are used throughout the application. Instead, we recommend using a soft delete procedure by indicating that a record should not be used going forward based on a status value of inactive or marked for deletion. The hard delete of a contact or account can have undesired consequences since the record is completely removed from the system upon deletion. For example, if contact James Jones is a principal investigator for one or more sites and his contact record is deleted, the sites on which he was the PI are also deleted. In the case of duplicate records, the record merge functionality can be utilized. When merging records, the data associated with each record will be associated with the post-merge surviving record. Therefore, prior to the merge, a decision must be made as to which record will survive and which record will be considered the source record. Once that decision is made, we recommend assigning a status, such as marked for deletion, to the source record or records. This can be tricky because field values in the source record will not exist after the merge. Only the values in the surviving records fields will remain, even if that value is null. For example, if you are merging two contact records and the source record contains a value in the job title field, but the surviving record does not, after the merge, there will be no value in the job title field. The source record field value for job title is overwritten by the value in the job title field in the surviving record, even though that value is null. The source record will disappear and only the surviving record will remain. As a note, we recommend that the merging of records be performed by an administrator. Otherwise, users can only merge records if they are the owner or primary user associated with those records. For contact records, we also encourage a standard practice of indicating a contact's main contact type at the contact level and identifying study and site-specific roles for the contact at the site level. For example, Dr. Jones can be a PI for Site A, a consultant for Site B, a co-PI for Site C, but his contact record would indicate that his official contact type is physician. Let's talk briefly about assessment templates. We strongly encourage companies to utilize the contact and account assessment functionality in Siebel Clinical. It is best to create standard assessment templates using objective assessment criteria and answer scales. These templates can then be used and compared over time and provide information to assist with site, investigator, and vendor selection. Remember, the same assessment can be applied to a contact or to an account multiple times to gather cumulative responses. As a final contact housekeeping function, we encourage companies to confirm that their employees or system users do not display in their contact list. These can be filtered out by an administrator. The result is a decrease in the number of contacts that display in your contact list, and it also ensures that a company employee is not accidentally selected as a site contact or other contact reference. Previously, we discussed the deletion of contact and account records, but I want to once again emphasize that the general rule of thumb in Siebel Clinical is do not delete records. The effect of the deletion of any record must be assessed before that delete button is clicked. The delete of a single record can cause unanticipated issues with other associated records. This is known as a cascading effect. In addition, the deletion of some types of record have a more negative impact than the deletions of others. An example of this is that deleting a site document will not necessarily have a significant impact on the system, but deleting a subject could delete or orphan activity records that you have already paid for. If you do decide to delete records, please be sure to delete from the bottom of the hierarchy to the top of the hierarchy. For example, first delete subjects that are associated to a site before you delete the site itself. Delete sites before you delete a region, and etc. As a side note, assessment templates cannot be deleted. Instead, they have to be inactivated by unchecking the active flag for the assessment record. Then it won't display in the assessment drop-down list. Okay, so now we're going to move on to templates. The trip report template. The best practice for the trip report template is to refrain from creating protocol or product-specific templates if at all possible. Instead, we encourage you to define one organizational standard template for each monitoring visit type, such as site initiation, routine monitoring, site closeout, etc. You then utilize your checklist items to make your templates generic. Document and activity templates. As you know, these templates are used in Siebel Clinical to standardize the documents and tasks associated with a clinical trial. Always attempt to make templates as generic as possible instead of protocol specific. In other words, don't enter a value in the protocol title field of a template, because then the template will only be available for use with that specific protocol. The creation of generic templates reduces the number of available templates in your list and also minimizes user confusion about which template they should use and select at any point in time. If a protocol is quite different from your usual protocols or requires many additional documents or activities to be tracked, the best practice is to copy the most comparable generic template and make it specific for that protocol. Subject visit templates, another one of our favorites. In Siebel Clinical, a subject visit template is created to facilitate the consistent application of the protocol across all sites and subjects. Oops. The template is used to set up subject visit schedules and activities according to the guidelines laid out in the protocol, and is then used to generate screening, rescreening, and enrollment schedules for each subject based on the subject's screening, rescreening, and enrollment dates. The concept of visit lead times in Siebel Clinical can be confusing for users, but must be understood in order to set up the subject visit template correctly. For screening visits, the lead time is the time from the subject's screen date to the next screening visit. Of course, this is typically 0, since there is usually only a single screening visit. For enrollment visits, the lead time is the time from the subject's enrollment date until the next scheduled enrollment visit. For example, the lead value for enrollment visit 2, which is scheduled to occur 2 weeks after enrollment visit 1, would be 2 if the lead unit was weeks, and 14 if the lead unit was days. The lead value for enrollment visit 3, which is scheduled to occur 4 weeks after the first enrollment visit, would be 4 weeks or 28 days. If lead times are not defined in the subject visit template, then the subject's visit schedule will not be calculated correctly, and all enrollment visits will be scheduled to occur on the same day. We also recommend that you use min and max units if the tracking and maintenance of subject visit windows is important for your trial. We will discuss this a bit more in protocol amendments, but when there is a need to create a new version of an SVT for a protocol, the best practice is to copy the existing version and then edit the visits and/or activities as necessary. One important thing to know is that it's quite important that you never delete an SVT if it has been applied to even one subject. Doing so can cause the unexpected disappearance of some related data. Let's talk about team members. Make it a standard practice to save a protocol, region, or site record before adding the team members. Also remember that you can add a member to the same team only once. Otherwise, you will probably receive an error message and have to backtrack a bit. Remove team members if they no longer have access to a protocol, region, or site. Even though the team member is removed, the history is maintained in the team history view. As a time saver shortcut, consider utilizing the position roll down and position roll up options whenever possible. Just remember that if, for instance, you use the position roll down option at the protocol level, the team members are only going to roll down to existing regions and sites at that point in time. They will need to be added to any new regions or sites that are created after that point in time. Clinical programs. A clinical program in Siebel Clinical is simply a logical combination of protocols. Use the Clinical Program Explorer view to see the overall clinical hierarchy under a clinical program. This view is often a forgotten view, but it can be quite useful. Information is displayed in a useful Explorer tree view format with record details of a selected file on the left being displayed in the right side of the view. Site management, site contacts. For each site associated with a protocol, be sure to maintain a current list of all site staff and their roles in terms of study-specific responsibilities. Include relevant contact information, such as addresses, phone, and fax numbers, as well as email addresses. And be sure to keep the list current as staff, information, or responsibilities change. We also encourage you to track the start and end date for site contacts in reference to their trial participation. Site visits within site management. It's a good idea to create a list of scheduled site visits as soon as the information is available. This process will provide metrics around planned and actual visit dates and may also help identify how often site visits are rescheduled and why. Advanced planning also helps CRAs create and maintain a master study schedule for reference and planning purposes and helps study managers gauge resource planning and study progress. Protocol amendments. When a protocol amendment occurs mid-study, but the visit schedule is not affected, then the only thing you really need to do in Siebel Clinical is to update the protocol version number at the protocol level. If, however, the visits, activities, or associated payment schedule is affected by the protocol amendment, the following additional tasks need to be completed. First, you need to create a new version of the existing SVT for that study by either creating a new subject visit template that addresses the amendment, or create a new version of an existing subject visit template, making appropriate changes to visits and activities. Next, you need to apply the new version of the SVT to the applicable sites via the Site Management Versions field. Make sure the new version is active by entering the IRB approval date and checking the active flag. Next, apply the new version of the SVT to enrolled subjects by either clicking the Apply Active Version button in the Site Management Subjects view, or apply it on a subject-by-subject basis via the Subject's Informed Consent field. Note that if you choose to use the Apply Active Version button, the new SVT version is applied to subjects who are not completed or early terminated. The Informed Consent date field, though, is left blank and then must be manually entered for each of the subjects. Once the new version of the SVT is applied to the subjects must then be enrolled under that new version. To do this, the user navigates to the subject screen and drills down on the screening number of an enrolled subject whose schedule needs to be updated for the revised subject visit template. You click the Visits View tab and then click the Enroll button for the subject. The system is going to prompt you on whether the uncompleted visits from the old version and the corresponding completed visits from the new version need to be deleted. The user can select OK in response to this message if the following criteria are met. The IRB approval date for the modified or new SVT is greater than the new SVT created date, and the subject informed consent date is greater than the new SVT created date. The user should select Cancel in response to this message if the above criteria have not been met. The visits for the new protocol version are then appended to the existing visits list and no visits are deleted. A user would then manually delete future scheduled visits that correspond to the original SVT and already completed visits that don't need to be repeated from the new SVT. Expenses and payments. We often receive questions about how to track various kinds of expenses and payments in Siebel Clinical. To touch on just a few of these, we encourage companies to track study startup expenses at the protocol expense view instead of waiting until all sites are created. This provides a picture of all the study startup expenses in a single location. Users also worry when they have made erroneous payment requests or actually wrong payments. To address a payment request that has not yet been paid and is known to contain something wrong in either the payment activities and/or in the amount, simply delete that payment. Yes, I'm actually telling you to delete something, but in this instance, you can delete the record because all of the payment activities within that payment request will once again be available for selection in the Payment Activities view. At that time, you can then generate a correct payment request for processing. To address a payment with a status of paid in the system, you can enter an ad hoc payment with a negative amount to counteract an overpayment, or you can enter an ad hoc payment with a positive amount to correct an underpayment. Ad hoc payments can also be used for site-specific fees or pass-through payments. Simply use a descriptive payment type to identify the payment. Final investigator payments. Siebel Clinical does a really nice job of calculating final payments when users have completed all activities consistently and correctly. Once a study is closed at a site and the final payment is due, you can follow these steps. In the Site Management Payment Activities view, mark all activities that have been completed but for which a payment request has not yet been generated with a status of completed. Then generate a payment request for those activities. If there are activities that are listed but were not completed during the study, consider deleting them just to have a clean database. In the Site Management Payment views, confirm that all paid payment requests have a status of paid and that the appropriate payment amount has been entered. In the same view, you create a new payment with a payment type of Final Payment. This action causes the system to auto-populate the requested amount field by subtracting the paid-to-date amount from the earned-to-date amount. It then also adds any amounts that were automatically withheld from previous investigator payments. The combined amounts will be the final amount to be paid to the site. Let's talk about queries. One of the most powerful features of Siebel Clinical is the ability for users to narrow down a list of records and/or create ad hoc reports through the querying of list applets. Queries can be simple or complex, they can be saved to be run again in the future, and they can be saved for all users. Here are just a few things to know about the query functionality. A basic query is case sensitive, so be sure you enter the exact case of the term you wish to query for. The Siebel application automatically adds a wildcard to the end of your query. For example, this means that if you search for the letters CLIN, the Siebel application looks for all words beginning with the letters CLIN. In addition, you can use the wildcard operator of an asterisk at the beginning or end of your search term to bring back results that end or begin with your search term. You can also use the wildcard by itself to find all records that have any value in a certain field. If your entry operator is, quote, is null, quote, in quotes, in a query field, all records that have no value in that field will be returned. A user can search for multiple terms in a single field by using either the query operator, quote, capital AND, in quote, which finds records with multiple values in one field and is useful for querying free text fields, or you can use the query operator, quote, or, to find records with one or another value in a field. After receiving your query results, you can refine them by clicking Query in the Application Level menu and then selecting Refine Query. You can also do this by opening the menu in the List applet and selecting Refine Query. Users are able to create dynamic queries for document expiration dates. For example, if you enter less than today, open and close parentheses, to return expired documents, or enter less than today plus 30 open and close parentheses to return expired documents and those that will expire in the next 30 days. This can be very useful for different regulatory documentations. If you do decide to enter a specific date as a query search term, be sure to use the date format that is specific to your implementation, because the date format is often something that is changed to meet a company's standards during an implementation. Querying is even easier with Query Assistant. A user can query on up to 4 fields at a given time and can even execute a case-insensitive query. Also, rather than having to remember all of your query operators yourself, the Query Assistant does that for you. The Query Assistant button becomes available once a query has begun. It appears on the top of the List applet where the Query button once was. A gray box at the bottom of the Query Assistant screen will explain in words exactly what the query will search for once you click Go. In that way, once you enter your terms, you're able to verify your query criteria before running the query and correct it if necessary. If there is a query that you run on a regular basis, you can save that query so that you can run it over and over again without having to re-enter the search terms. Keep in mind that saving a query is different than saving the results of a query. Saving a query simply means saving the set of search terms. To save a query after running the query you wish to save, in the application level menu, simply choose Query and Save As, and fill in the information required. It will then be available for selection in the Saved Queries drop-down list for that specific screen. Keep in mind that saved queries are only viewable by those who create them and are screen-specific. However, if you create a saved query that you think would be beneficial for the other users, you can ask your system administrator to make it public. It will then be available to all users and is then considered a predefined query. A predefined query always runs against all the data in the current screen, and even if you have run a query to narrow the data set, the predefined query always uses all data within the screen and not just the data shown in the list. And as a final query note, to clear query results and return to all records, simply click Query and then Go without entering any search terms or operators. Reports. As you know, reports can be generated in a variety of ways in Siebel Clinical, and we're going to touch on these just briefly. The canned or pre-formatted reports are generated by clicking the Report button on the toolbar of specific screens. Here you can see an example of a site contact report. Excel exports are basically a data dump of list applet information to an Excel worksheet format. The best practice is to sort records and arrange the columns of information before exporting the data. Quick prints are HTML snapshots of the current view. Similar to Excel exports, best practice is to sort records and arrange columns before clicking the quick print icon so that only the data you want is displayed. How much of a view displays in Quick Print is defined within the User Preferences, Printing View, General Behavior section for each user. The recommended preferred settings are displayed in the slide. Here is a partial example of a Quick Print report for a site contacts view. In Siebel Clinical 8.1.x, the My BIP Reports option allows users to retrieve reports they ran at different points in time. However, since the number of reports can rapidly accumulate and take up valuable server space, it is recommended that these reports be purged on a regular or monthly basis. By that time, reports that need to be saved should have been stored locally or on a shared drive or in some other type of document management system. We recommend that only administrators perform this task because of the risk of inadvertently depleting or contaminating the report repository. Change control. Typically, once users start utilizing a CTMS on a regular basis, they discover changes or enhancements that they would like to see made in future phases. An organized method of tracking these changes and enhancements is suggested. A change or enhancement form that is submitted to a specified individual is one way of tracking this information. When evaluating change requests, our experience has shown that many changes are requested to support an outdated business process only because it has, end quote, always been done that way. We encourage business units to consider whether it would be better to improve an existing business process and make it more effective, instead of spending the time and expense for what might be an unnecessary system change. Therefore, all recommended changes should be thoroughly vetted and prioritized prior to a new phase of implementation. Finally, we want to just offer in addition to our post-implementation best practices, we want to just provide you with a few additional tips and tricks that can come in handy when using Siebel Clinical. For instance, Multiple email addresses for a contact can be entered in a single email field if they are separated by commas. Remember that you can only undo records that have not been saved. If you right-click in a form or list applet, you can access the same menu of actions provided by the menu button in that form or list applet. A thread bar helps you keep track of your navigational path when you drill across to a view on another screen using record hyperlinks. You can return to a previous point in the path by clicking the corresponding name on the thread bar. Keep in mind that when you drill across screens using record hyperlinks, you remain in the same thread. Therefore, the screen or view you return to will not display all available records, but will instead display the previously selected record set. A thread bar is reset whenever you navigate to another screen using a screen tab or the site map instead of a hyperlink. Sorting a large number of records, for instance, all of your contacts, can be a very slow process. Instead, we recommend that you query first and then sort. Advanced sort is the ability to sort records in a list applet by up to 3 criteria. Remember to make sure that your sort is logical. For example, sort addresses by country, then state and province, and then city, instead of by city, then state and province, and then country. Users are also able to change multiple field values at the same time. For example, you can change the sent and received date for multiple site documents at the same time. You can change the existing value to another value for up to 4 fields at the same time. This can be quite a time saver when used properly. You can save now, a lot of people ask whether you can save the charts functionality within Siebel Clinical. You can save a Siebel Clinical chart for use in other applications, such as Microsoft PowerPoint, by following the directions on the slide. The copy of the chart can then be included in presentations, documents, or other places you may want to display a chart. You can freeze columns in a list applet to maintain a point of reference when scrolling to the right by double-clicking the column header of the rightmost column you want to freeze. To unfreeze, you simply double-click again to unfreeze columns. We also always remind users not to close the browser window to exit the Siebel application. Instead, get in the habit of choosing File and then log out from the application level menu. This ensures that the most recent changes have indeed been saved and avoids hanging sessions in the database, which can use database resources and potentially affect performance for other users. And specifically for Siebel Clinical 8.1.x, you can now use the web browser's back and forward buttons to navigate in your Siebel Clinical application. Before, we had always encouraged users not to do this, but in Siebel Clinical 8.1, you can use your web browser's back button. You can also locate screens and views that you recently accessed by using the web browser's history function. I know we're getting very close to the end of our 1-hour session, but we have received several different questions, and you can also ask questions by unmuting your line. You press *7 on your phone, and you can ask those questions live. Just keep in mind that the presentation is being recorded in case you want to use your name or not. So,
the conference has been unmuted.
Hello? Okay. We got quite a few questions as we were going through, and so let me quickly look through some of these. And like I said previously, any questions we don't get to during this time, we will be sure to address individually to each of you. Several people have asked if they can get a PDF copy of the presentation. I will have to check with someone about that. We will be giving you a link to the presentation so you can look at it again, but I will need to check on the PDF version of that. So I will get back to the individuals who ask about that. What is the business value of clinical development analytics to Siebel Clinical? The analytics do provide a great deal of value. I wouldn't say that really falls under the guise of best practices. So what I plan to do for the person who asked this question is we will respond to this question individually. Lots of people just want the slides. So I'm glad that I hope that you have found this information helpful. So we have a question about processes to address some FDA questions. And let's see, that one jumped back up. Oh, that person had to leave the call, but I would want to know a little bit more about what that person is speaking to. It looks like it's probably a user security question, so we'll see if we can't get back to some more information about that as well. Most of these questions look like they're very specific and sometimes not best practice oriented. So I believe since we have used our allotted time, what we will do is respond to most of them by email. We don't want to hold you guys up, but we do thank you all for sharing the past hour or so with us. We hope you find that it was time well spent. I quickly want to let you know that we do have additional webinars planned for June and July. On June 23rd, we're going to be offering Completing and Approving Electronic Trip Reports in Siebel Clinical. And on July 21st, we'll be presenting Integrating Your Clinical Trial Management System with an Electronic Document Management System. Once again, today's presentation should be available for download from our website. Let's move on here so you can see our website address. And also I want you to feel free as you go about your day, if you think of additional questions that you have or really any time, feel free to contact me directly. My email address is on the screen now, or you can give us a call. Also, if there's anything we can do to respond to any of your organization's needs, we're always open to discussing that with you as well. Anyway, thanks again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.